As I was preparing tonight, part of the Gospel of Luke came to mind. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this passage. And I think it ties in to what I'm going to be talking about tonight, although you might not see it at first. But it's from Luke chapter 5. And I'm just going to read a small part of it. This is when Jesus was preaching at the Lake of Gennesaret. Getting into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, he asked him to put out a short distance from the shore. Then Jesus sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. After he'd finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and lower your nets for a catch." Simon said in reply, "Master, we've worked hard all night and have caught nothing. But at your command, I will lower the nets." When they'd done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their nets were tearing. They signaled to their partners in another boat to come help them. They came and filled both boats so that they were in danger of sinking. Now, for those of us for whom that's a very familiar passage, that's a passage of great hope and a passage that most of us equate with Jesus giving the apostles the directive to go out and become fishers of men. But as I was pondering that passage, I was thinking about little boys in Thailand, 7, 8, 9 years old, who are sold into slavery in the Thai fishing industry. Now, the Thai fishing industry is a large part of the Thai economy. Most of the shrimp that's eaten around the world comes from that part of the world. And like any other business, they look for ways to cut costs and cut corners. And one of the most popular ways to do that is to buy small children, especially boys. They're light, they're quick, and they take them out onto these boats, sometimes for weeks and months at a time. And they literally work these children to death. And when they're done with them, they simply toss them overboard because they know that there are plenty more back on shore. Now, as exotic and as beautiful as Thailand is, it also is the #1 sex tourism destination in the world. I don't know if you knew that there was such a thing as sex tourism, but that's where people pay, just as you and I would, perhaps to go on a tour of Italy or France, but they go to Thailand to have sex with people who've been enslaved, men, women, and children. And when I say children, I don't mean 15 and 16 years old, although those are included. I mean 3 and 4-year-olds, and sometimes younger. So that idea of casting nets is one that has kind of a double meaning for me. I'm sure that most of us here tonight, if we think over the past week or two of our lives, we could think of some of the purchases we've made. Maybe you put gas in your car, you had a lunch out, maybe you stopped at the grocery store. And I would imagine that all of us could think over the past week or two that we've probably spent somewhere around $90 easily. For that, you could purchase a human being. That is the going rate on the global market for a person. Now, if you're a trafficker, that's a very good investment because that $90 is going to pay you back time and time again. Unlike drugs or guns, a human being can be sold over and over and over again. A woman who's being trafficked sexually will probably make somewhere around $1,000 a night if she's working in a city like Chicago or Los Angeles. So that $90 investment for that pimp is a pretty good investment on his part or her part. I don't want to talk a whole lot of numbers tonight, but one number that I do want to give you is that we know last year about 21 million people were trafficked worldwide. It's likely more than that, but we know that at least 21 million were trafficked. Now, if you're like me, 21 million is a number that really doesn't mean much of anything. So let me give you this image. It would be as if someone had taken the entire nation of Australia and enslaved them. That's what 21 million looks like. And right now, in this moment, as we're sitting here, there are more people being bought and sold in slavery around the world than in the entire 300-year history of the Atlantic slave trade. Just in this moment. That's how big of a problem we have. Now, while sex trafficking gets a lot of attention, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen the movie Taken or seen an episode of SVU, labor trafficking is actually globally a much larger problem. And that affects usually middle-aged men, because those are people that are trying to support their families. And they're usually in situations where they're so desperate, they're willing to believe that guy that says, if you pay me $7,000, I can get you to the United States, I can get you a visa, I can get you a job. Now, when it comes to sex trafficking, the average age of a person being sex trafficked is about 12 years old, and it's getting lower. Most sex trafficking victims are young girls, teenagers, but boys are trafficked as well. And these are young people who are typically from abusive homes, unstable homes, homes where there are addiction problems. And Mike mentioned earlier that one of the things that I wanted to do in my monograph, but also here tonight, was talk about some ways that we can help, because it's great knowing, but we need to do something. And this is an area that we can help, because all of us can look in our circles of influence, our churches, our neighborhoods, our families, our schools, and find these kids that we know are hurting. Maybe their home life is not that great. Maybe we know that there are addiction problems there or abuse problems there. And we can reach out to them and let that young person know that they are loved, they are valued, and they do not need to seek affection in dark, shadowy places, because that's what happens to these young people. They're kicked out of their homes, they run away, they have no one at home that cares for them. And a pimp becomes someone who offers them affection. And they're so starved for that, that they'll do anything for what they perceive to be love. We can fill that gap. And that's something all of us can do with almost no effort on our parts. In West Michigan, at any given time, there are about 2,300 young people for sale for sex trafficking, and it is disgustingly easy to find them. I'm sure that many of you have probably used Craigslist to find a used sofa, or maybe look for a lost pet. Craigslist, Backpage, and other places like that have ads for models, escorts, dancers. All of those are ads placed there by sex traffickers. Grand Rapids Art Prize, our very own jewel that we all love and appreciate, and events like the Super Bowl are boons for traffickers. Anytime that you have a large event with a lot of people who have a lot of money to spend, legitimate good times, underneath all of that, there are traffickers. That means in our community, we have people who are willing to rent their houses to be used as brothels to sex traffickers. That means that our hotels and our motels, and not just the dirty ones down on 28th Street, but the Amway Grand Plaza, the JW Marriott, are being used for sex trafficking. That means that people in our community are willing to buy and sell human beings on a regular basis. That's here in Grand Rapids. Now, we know that, hang on, I want to switch gears for just a second. Mike alluded a little bit when he introduced me about what we do here at Acton. But some people are still a little bit puzzled about human trafficking because a lot of what we do here talks about economics and religious liberty. That's what the sign says, right? But human trafficking is very much in our wheelhouse. Everything that we do here at Acton is based on the truth of the dignity of the human person, that each and every one of us is made in the image and likeness of a loving God. Every one of us. And everything about human trafficking tries to destroy that truth. It's what's whispered in the ear of every trafficking victim. You are not worth anything. No one loves you. The only person that you have is me, your captor. God has forgotten about you. No one cares. Human trafficking is also a rule of law issue. And I'll give you this example, which is rather startling. It was mere months ago in Michigan that it became illegal to solicit a minor for sexual purposes. Before that, it was not illegal. Just in January, that became a law in Michigan. Okay? Our legal system is literally running behind the traffickers, trying to catch up. Our laws our legal system does not know what to do with traffickers, and they certainly don't know what to do with trafficking victims. Generally speaking, trafficking victims are treated like prostitutes and criminals, and the traffickers and the Johns, the solicitors, are given a legal slap on the wrist. One example that I used in my book is from Las Vegas. Now, in Las Vegas, it is illegal to prostitute anyone. Prostitution is illegal in Las Vegas, not in the state of Nevada, but in the city of Las Vegas. A couple of cops came upon a car with a 54-year-old man and a 12-year-old girl. It was clear that sexual activity was going on, and it was clear that money was changing hands. The cops arrested the 12-year-old girl, and they let the man go. That is pretty typical. And again, our laws simply have not caught up to this system. We live in a country where rule of law is pretty darn good. Imagine places like Guatemala or Cambodia or Thailand or Bulgaria, where corruption is king and money speaks. And that's what human trafficking thrives on. It thrives on that darkness of corruption. So in most of the world, the traffickers always have an upper hand. Human trafficking will not stop until we stop making it financially beneficial to buy and sell human beings. Traffickers, for the most part, are not going to respond to moral outrage, the outrage that I hope you're feeling right now. But they will respond if we take their money away from them. And that's probably the only thing that they are going to respond to. Human trafficking is also an economic issue, which is, of course, one of our main things here at Acton. And it's costing us a lot of money. Our courts and our legal systems are drowning in these cases. Our social service agencies, whether they're public or they're private, are dealing with children, young women, young men who have enormous and very specialized needs. And we have to pay for that. We have to pay for that. And there's also an enormous amount of money that goes untaxed, is being laundered. You know, it's a $32 billion a year industry globally. The only thing that outsells it is drugs. It costs us a lot of money to allow this to keep going on. And that speaks nothing to the moral cost. On Monday afternoon this week, just a couple of days ago, in the early afternoon, my phone rang, and it was my daughter, and she was sobbing. She said, "Mom, we went on a field trip today, and we went by the house." The house. And I knew exactly what she meant. My daughter is now 19. She has bipolar disorder, and she's cognitively impaired. She functions at about the level of a third grader. And just over 3 years ago, she was caught in a human trafficking situation. She had been at school and gotten in trouble. She was mad. She walked out of her classroom, and she walked out of her school. She walked down the street, and she disappeared. And we had absolutely no idea where she was. My husband and I were beyond frantic. We were doing everything we could think of to try and find her. Driving up and down the streets of Grand Rapids day and night, calling people. She was gone. About 2 days after she went missing, I got a call from the police department that they had found her. She was at the YWCA across the street, and would I come? So I did. And I found a very broken and very shattered girl. We found out later that when she had walked those few blocks down the street from her school, it was in January, a man approached her and said, "You're way too pretty to be out here on such a cold day without a coat. Why don't you come inside and get warmed up?" And she did. And he gave her some beer, and he raped her repeatedly. And then he sold her to a couple of other men who did the same. Eventually, she was taken to a house, the house, where there were a number of other young girls. They all had their clothing taken away from them. They were photographed, presumably for sale on the internet, and they were locked inside. Now, my daughter, despite all of her impairments, is the bravest person I know, and she's tough and tenacious. She waited until one of those men fell asleep. She stole the key from his pocket, the sheet off her bed, and she ran. She hid in an abandoned building just a couple of blocks from here, and someone found her. We don't know who it was. It was probably one of the homeless people. He gave her his coat, and then he went and found one of the social workers that works the streets down here, and that's how we got her back. Over the next few months, we tried very hard to help her heal. But as you can imagine, the scars ran very deep. and we eventually had to have her hospitalized for 4.5 months. I'm happy to tell you that today my daughter is a very happy, very whole, and very joyful human being. But she literally had an army of people. Her family, her friends, professionals that helped her. And I am here to tell you that most of the young people and most of the adults who are caught in human trafficking do not have that. We are the ones that are standing in the gap. We are so lucky that we got our daughter back, so blessed. We literally were this close to losing her forever. And then when we got her back, we had either the resources or the tenacity to find the resources to be able to help her. Most victims do not have that. And that's where we have to step up to the plate. Now, I found this quote that was attributed to Winston Churchill. It says, "Once in a while, you will stumble upon the truth, but most of us manage to pick ourselves up and hurry along as if nothing had happened." We can't afford to do that where human trafficking is concerned. Knowledge and education are not enough. It is not enough for us to say, "I know that human trafficking exists." That will not do. We must act upon what we know. So now you all know. You are all charged with doing something about human trafficking. We are the ones that have to cast our nets into the deep, dark, shadowy waters of human trafficking. We have to pull the traffickers into the light of justice, and we have to pull the victims into the light of healing. Thank you. It is my great pleasure to be able to introduce Pamela Alderman. Pamela has been an artist her whole life. She started out her illustrious career by sketching on napkins with her father when she was a child. She has been an entrant in Art Prize every year since its inception, and her piece that is installed here, The Scarlet Cord, was in the top 20 in last year's Art Prize. The Scarlet Cord was also on display in Phoenix this year at the Super Bowl and for the Pro Bowl. And it was there that a student approached her and said, "The same scarlet cord that tethered these children to their pimps can be used to suture their wounds." Pamela's work speaks of great trauma, but also great healing. I am thrilled to share the stage with her tonight, but even more thrilled to call her my friend. Please welcome Pamela Alderman.
Thank you, Elise. And thank you for your book, and thank you for being so brave as to share your personal story. That takes an enormous amount of courage. Thank you so much. Well, I have to start out with a fun story after all that trafficking talk. So, more than 32 years ago, but I met my husband in Japan. And I don't want my children to know this part, but they do know that 23 days after our first date, he asked me to marry him. And I said yes, and it's lasted 32 years. Hello, my love. Well, that night I couldn't sleep. Human beings displayed like animals in a pet store window haunted me. When I was 19, while traveling through Europe, our bus stopped at the red light district of Amsterdam. As I stood in the middle of the district, window after window displayed women perched on chairs, selling their bodies. Next to each window was a door, and a steady stream of men flowed in and out of each door. I didn't know that during that time, the enormous abuse and degradation of women that I had witnessed would one day grow into an art prize installation called the Scarlet Cord. The Scarlet Cord is to help, the purpose is to help raise awareness for children who have been sex trafficked, as we heard from Elise in Thailand, as I witnessed in Amsterdam, and as I learned during our prize, even here in Grand Rapids. So the Scarlet Cord was displayed outside the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum in a 40-foot storage container. And inside the container, this Scarlet Cord twisted throughout the container, and this cord, plus 30 weathered doors and 5 works of art, this represented the American children that are enslaved in the commercial sex industry. Seeing the needs of the public and hearing their heart cries during Art Prize, I began to realize that the artwork spoke to enormous needs. And this shame and the brokenness that was hidden for a long time, in some cases even years, was finally released. Women wanted to hold my hand or hug me. Some literally laid their heads on my chest and just cried. Men wanted to shake my hand as well. The Scarlet Cord became a street outreach. These wounded people, they needed someone to identify their sorrow, to acknowledge their pain, and to touch them. So Tether tells a story of a teenage prostitute's baby in India. Women at Risk International, they're an organization here in Granville, Michigan. They are currently trying to rescue this baby. They've been involved in this baby's life for a few years, and they're in a tenacious battle as well. And right now it doesn't look so great, but people are praying all across the world, so there is still hope. But her traffickers of this little baby, they literally, when she was an infant, they tied her to a post with a red scarlet cord. Then no one was allowed to touch or talk to this baby. The traffickers, their goal was to create the perfect sex slave, a child desperate for affection. So this little girl's story, this inspired the Scarlet Cord. As I studied sex trafficking here in America, I realized there's a similar connection between what was happening there in India and what is happening here in America. By using manipulation and deception, that pimps are enabled to traffic and to capture these children. They use this thin psychological tether. It's an invisible tether, but it's called a trauma bond. Here's the impact. During Art Prize, one young woman said, "This exhibit is killing me, but I had to come back." She said that the deeper you step into the abuse, the deeper the addiction. The thin scarlet cord, she said, pictures the connection that I felt with my abusive boyfriend. She said as she moved through the container, the cord thickened. And she said, that's just like the entrapment that I lived. And then she ended by saying, you just can't walk away. Stripped. Stripped depicts how pornographers, they deliberately target our children. The pornography first entrapped a little 10-year-old when he clicked on a computer pop-up that said funny football pictures. Well, when he clicked on the pop-up, it brought him right to a pornography website. So the family home computer became the portal to the red light district. So this work, the figure in this work is devoid of details, and this is picturing how the producers of pornography, they are purposely targeting our children. They are stripping our youth of their innocence. one visitor said to me, to the Scarlet Cord, she said that when she was 2 years old, she was brought to a room full of men, and there was no one there to protect her, no one there to make sure that she was safe while these men sexually abused her. So this young toddler's life was stripped and destroyed by unbridled sexual appetites. It's encouraging, though, during Art Prize, one gentleman said to me, after seeing the Scarlet Cord, he went to his men's group to challenge his men's group to rethink pornography. And he was saying how children are, he started to say that how children are forced, in some cases, into the, with images taken of them, like Elise was telling us about with her own daughter. And that Shared Hope International says that, I believe it's 1 out of every 5 images in pornography is of a child. So he was just trying to challenge his men's group to rethink the whole issue. That's just an example how one person can, just help the situation of human trafficking by just helping others to become aware of it. Yeah, so sex between an adult and a child is not consensual. It's called rape. For many of these trafficking victims, the abuse started when they were very young, both for the little boys and little girls, where they were often molested by someone that they knew. So sometimes even within their own home, it's where the first seeds of sex trafficking were planted and the children just became vulnerable to this issue. The impact? During Art Prize, a young teen just fell into me, and she was just crying and crying. And I was trying to listen to her story as she was just crying so hard. And I was able to hear her and kind of slow her down, where at 13, she was raped by an older man and a young teen. Just the pain and devastation that marred this young life. Rape represents how the sexual crimes committed against these young people release acidic emotions in the same way how when we have an appendix, a burst appendix releases toxic poisons within our body. But again, here's the hope that if these children are rescued out of sex trafficking, many will begin to heal. And they will begin to learn. It takes time, but they can learn how to respond once again to healthy compassion. Just the example, Elise is your own family, how you just brought your daughter back to life. Branded. I painted branded with a livestock branding marker that is shown there. It was about the size of this clicker. And ranchers use this all-weather branding marker to brand their cattle. Pimps call the children under their control their stable. And then within this stable, the pimps tattoo the children. They're tattooed on the inside of their lips, someplace in the body, to denote the ownership of the pimp. And he then herds these children into this emotionless and mechanical existence called sex trafficking. The impact? One woman during the Super Bowl shared where her body bears the brands or scars of sex trafficking. Oh, these scars were caused by gunshot wounds and by stabbings, and they were inflicted upon her by the buyers of sex. They're called Johns, the buyers of sex. They're the ones that inflicted these wounds on this woman. Wounded is an 8-foot oil painting. It's right now in the gallery where you can view that afterwards if you are interested. And it tells the story of Jenny. Jenny is a young teen, and she is bound to her pimp by an invisible tether, this trauma bond. This pimp has taken a long time. He has time. He has conditioned her, whether it takes a couple weeks, a couple of months, but he is carefully crafting that he is manipulating her, he's using force, he's using coercion to get her to do what he wants. She is his asset, his financial asset. The impact? During Art Prize, an older woman grabbed me and buried her head into my chest. And she just started sobbing. And then it just happened so quickly, before I had a chance to say anything, she just walked away and she blended into the Art Prize crowd. And for a moment, I tried to pick her out, and she was just gone. And I thought, how many people are around us, the walking wounded, people maybe at the grocery store, people in our own neighborhood, maybe someone, or one of our friends, or maybe even a family member, that they have this secret from their past, some sexual crime that's been committed against them, but they don't dare tell anyone. And so this just holds them, it tethers them, it holds them captive. Forced. Force is a textile work where I painted the painting with thread. And I wanted to combine the warm and cool colors, leaving the work unfinished. And the purpose was to make a statement how a young life is abruptly interrupted when a child has been sexually exploited. The impact during Art Prize, one woman came to me to tell me her story, and she was just shaking and crying. And she said that her dad had sex trafficked her at work to the other men at work from the time she was 2 until the time she was 5. So her dad was her pimp. Okay, so as I was watching her, I thought, she reflects the work. I mean, just her posture and her tone of voice, it was just reflected in the work. Just the trauma that she had been put through. And here was a young life that was just ravaged by sexual exploitation that was caused by her own father. Well, as Elise mentioned, that the Scarlet Cord was invited to be exhibiting during the Pro Bowl and the Super Bowl this past January and February by Streetlight USA. They're an organization in Phoenix, and that they help rescue girls out of sex trafficking, and they provide housing for these girls. They work with minors. That's who they're servicing, is these minor children. And again, the purpose during the Pro Bowl and Super Bowl was to raise awareness of sex trafficking. And the Super Bowl, as Elise was also mentioning, this is at the epicenter of the American sex industry. During the Super Bowl of Miami in 2010, 10,000 children were brought in to be trafficked during the Super Bowl. Yeah, kind of let those numbers, like Elise said, sink in. Well, for 17 days, the Super Bowl was in Phoenix, and the Scarlet Cord was just offering hope and healing to the wounded and to the curious who came to visit the installation. One middle-aged woman said that when she was a young teen, that why her father was wearing the coveted Super Bowl ring, she was being sex trafficked. Another little girl who came through the exhibit with her mother, I think maybe first grade, kindergarten, she sat down on the curb on the road after going through the exhibit and just cried and cried. And she said, "I know what it's about. I know what it's about." Another young couple, as they walked through the container, the young man had his arm around the young woman, and she was just crying, softly crying. He was trying to console her. Well, we wanted to move people beyond the emotional response, something that Mike mentioned. We want to move people to action. And so one young college student, when he came through the exhibit, he said, "What can I do?" And that's where we came up with this Do One Thing challenge. We wanted to move the audience to a positive step where what could they do? Well, they could contact an elected official to get our laws up to speed and start going after the pimps and the Johns, the buyers of sex, not the 12-year-olds. And the college students, we encourage them, you can start on social media. You're the generation of social media. You can start the conversation and help inform people that they even know that this exists. Or you could volunteer at a local organization such as Women at Risk, or in Phoenix, Streetlight USA. I'm sure Acton or Elise, or myself afterwards, you could talk to us if you're interested, and we could help give you the name of other organizations here, especially in our area. So by confronting the harsh reality of child sex trafficking, we activate hope and healing. The impact, one youth group worker said that when they had youth on a weekend retreat, they were talking to the kids about sex trafficking, and the kids started to throw their cell phones into the campfire, their iPhones into the campfire, because their phones were full of pornography, both the boys and the girls. So imagine when they went home and told their parents they no longer had their iPhones. I'm sure that made a statement. So during our prize, a retired police officer, he said while he was on the force that they had never received any training on sex trafficking. He came back the next day to tell me that he stayed up late that night just researching sex trafficking and trying to learn more about the issue. So during the Super Bowl, we also wanted to encourage people, especially those that were telling us such a hard story. So Streetlight USA gave me this basket of rocks, and the girls that they had rescued painted beautiful designs on the rocks and painted words like hope or believe. And so there's one young woman was telling me her story of how she had been sex trafficked at work. And I gave her one of the stones, and she was so touched. It was just a stone. But she was so touched. She said, oh, she was so too shy, but she was going to ask me if she could buy one of the stones. But then I gave it to her. And I thought, it's just amazing how just a little bit of love can go such a long ways, and how this young woman ended up feeling so encouraged. So we took this Do One Thing challenge as well as the artists and the volunteers that helped me, and we gave out these Scarlet Cord bracelets during Art Prize and the Super Bowl as well. Women at Risk sent an army of volunteers to help me. Over 70 men and women helped, and we gave out 30,000 Scarlet Cord bracelets to the Art Prize visitors. And to the adults, when we tied the bracelets on them. So this was helping us to connect with all the Art Prize visitors personally with each one. And when we tied the bracelets on the adults, we would say something like, this Scarlet Cord is a reminder to build circles of protection around children in need, and hopefully one specific child in your life. I mean, we can't save all these children, the millions that Elise was telling us about, but we could help one child. And then to the children, we would lean down and we would tie the bracelet on them, and we would say, these Scarlet Cord bracelets are a reminder to be kind to others. If you see someone being unkind, tell an adult. Or if you see someone who at school doesn't have any friends, you can be kind. You could be their friend. And the adults were just so happy that we boiled the message down to kindness. So everyone left happy on that one. So tonight, I have some very gracious volunteers who are willing to tie red cord bracelets on you. If you would like one, we would love to give you one. So make sure you get one tonight if you're interested. Well, the impact, while tying the bracelets on a little 9-year-old, she suddenly interrupted me and she said, my grandfather was unkind to me and he went to prison. Yeah. The Scarlet Cord became a place of healing. The work invites visitors to experience hope and renewal. The impact, one older woman, she was very nicely dressed, came up to me during Art Prize, and she just leaned into me, and then she just sighed this deep, heavy sigh, and then she just walked away. And I just realized that something transpired between us, whether it was large or whether it was small. This woman experienced healing. So this woman, and during our prize in the Super Bowl, so many others like her, these women took the first bold steps towards healing by acknowledging the abuse that they had experienced. Some of them were acknowledging this abuse for the very first time. And then by refusing to allow the shame and the guilt to hold them captive any longer. Those were big steps for those people. But these brave people, they're the ones that helped inspire the Scarlet Cord. That was the container drop at our price. I thought it was so exciting. But I love Dr. Maya Angelou, her quote, that the love of one person can heal the scars left by a larger society. So I'd like to leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela, very much. We'd like to invite Elise and Pamela to both come to the stage. At this time, we have plenty of time for questions and their answers. So if you would just raise your hand if you have a question.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. My question has to do with the legality of the law, or lack thereof, but I'm struggling why this is not considered the same as slavery. And we have all sorts of law against slavery.
That's a really complex question, and it has a lot of very complex answers. But in my opinion, a lot of it has to do with the money. In the same way that, slave owners 200 years ago were not willing to give up their slaves because it's what enabled them to run very large farms for very little money. This is a huge business. And many, many people make a lot of money off of it. I also think that for many people in the legal system, the problem is just overwhelming. And it's very difficult to wrap their minds around. It's literally like trying to turn a ship around. And it's just going to take so much effort. But as I said before, I think that the only way that we're going to get a handle on it is by cutting off the money flow. That's the only thing that the traffickers are going to respond to.
My question is also for Elise. Thank you for the presentation, first of all. It was very, very informative. There was recently a documentary that I'd seen that was probably about an hour long, and I'm trying to remember the exact details of it, but I do believe it might have been Thailand. In fact, it was dealing with these fishing ships and people being out to sea at month. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, was it Dyson? Was it connected with Dyson? Had something? Yeah. Well, so this is the question that I have: is to what extent do you have resources for people to be able to make economic sort of decisions based upon based upon what companies are using or interacting with these sort of like more seedy elements in less
there's a couple of
ways.
websites. One's called Free the Slaves, and there are a couple of others. But if you go online and Google something like slave-free products or that sort of thing, but Free the Slaves is one organization that I know of that helps you find places that you can purchase things that are made without slavery, but it's so endemic that it's almost impossible. And again, money is what drives this because, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone, we all want to be able to budget our money. Most of us do not have unlimited finances. So we can go to the store, Walmart or Target, and buy a $15 t-shirt and not really know its provenance. Or we can pay $50 for a t-shirt knowing that it was made without slavery. That's how endemic it is. So as consumers, we have to try and be as smart as possible. And but I think that it can be very overwhelming. And what you really need to do is focus on those that are closest to you. Those children that are at risk, educating people, and being aware of what's going on in our own communities.
You mentioned women at risk.
Yes.
There's a store on 44th Street.
Yes, there is.
And I'm wondering what the role that they play in addressing this problem, and if they have or they sponsor safe houses where people can escape this enslavement.
Well, Pamela and I are both big fans of Women at Risk International. Neither of us are affiliated with them. We're just great friends of theirs. Women at Risk has a store on 44th Street. They also have one in Rockford, and they have one in Naperville, Illinois. And all of the products that they sell there are made by primarily women who have been rescued from trafficking. Women at Risk International works in over 40 countries, including the United States. And they have a several-pronged approach. They educate about human trafficking. They walk alongside people who are in trafficking situations, because often it takes an enormous amount of time and effort for these people to work up the courage to leave that trafficking situation. And Women at Risk International and their volunteers all around the world walk with these people and say, we're your friends. We don't want anything from you. When you are able to leave, we will be here for you. And then, as you might imagine, for many of these women, having spent, most of their life, perhaps, being trafficked, they come out with no education, no job skills, and are terribly frightened. So they do have safe houses. They offer educational opportunities, vocational training, and just a host of other services that help these victims try and regain control of their own lives.
Yeah. Sometimes the journey's long, so they have to walk with these women for a long time. And some of the women kind of fall back, and they just have to be patient, try to love these women, gain their trust, and then try to bring them back out. So it's a long process. It's a real commitment.
So I was just wanting to thank you, too, for this presentation. My voice is a little squeaky, I'm sorry. But just yesterday, I saw on the internet an ad for summer work, and it had pictures of cell phones on it and a phone number. I'm not sure that it wasn't posted by you, because sometimes I see your stuff. But what does a person do when they see that type of advertising? I mean, who do they call? Was it the FBI or?
You can call the local police department.
Will they do anything?
Sometimes. You can call Senator Judy Emmons, who's a state senator here in the state of Michigan. She's from the Montcalm County area. Her office does tremendous work in the area of human trafficking, and if they can't answer your question, they can point you in the right direction. You can call your own legislator and ask them. You can call the Better Business Bureau. And that actually raises a really good point. I know that many of us have had kids come to our door in the summertime selling candy bars, and they're not your neighbor kids. Those kids are probably being trafficked. Some of the things that you might want to ask them, and they're not likely to answer you honestly, but you can ask them, do you feel safe? Is the person in that car out there your father? It's good to get the license plate and give it to the local police. But those children very often are being trafficked.
Yeah, Women at Risk, they teach that it's not a good idea to try to rescue the child yourself, just as a concerned citizen, but to go through the law enforcement. There's the Do One Thing poster, there's one in the gallery space, and it has a 188 number. And this is, again, a hotline where it's anonymous, where you can just say what you've observed, and then hopefully an official will get involved in the situation.
There's actually an app, and I mentioned this in my book, that you can put on your smartphone. It's called Red Light Traffic, and it allows you to anonymously report a person, a situation, or a business where you think that trafficking is occurring. You input the information, it goes to the National Trafficking Hotline. They then send it to the appropriate local authorities. But it's free, you can put it on any smartphone.
I think the color red was an interesting thing to me, and I wonder whether you could tell me why you chose the red Scarlet Cord, because having read the Bible, I know of a scarlet cord that saved the lives of certain people because it was hung out of the window, and obviously the person who had this scarlet cord used this scarlet cord to identify herself as a prostitute.
Right.
Her name was Rahab.
You're right. Thank you for bringing that up. That's an important story. I appreciate that. The story, because the Scarlet Cord was influenced by the little baby in India, that her traffickers used this red scarlet cord to literally tie her to that post in the middle of the brothel. So that's why I chose the name the Scarlet Cord. But as Elise read at the beginning when she was introducing me, how the one art prize, or the Super Bowl visitor had said how this Scarlet Cord that binds the children, that same cord can be used to suture their wounds. So I just thought that was so insightful, because yeah, that Scarlet Cord in the case of that child from India, that was a very, just a wicked, heinous act to do this to this baby. And yet we can be handing out these red scarlet cords and offering hope and talking to people at work or in our communities about hope and about healing and how we can help children in sex trafficking. We can't help all the children, but maybe we can just help one child. And so in the same way, you know, where Rahab was rescued, was she left out that scarlet cord, then she was rescued. So again, the scarlet cord in that situation was a cord of hope. So yes.
And I also think that anybody who has been trafficked, whether it's labor trafficking or sex trafficking, they bear scars, and they're always going to have them. Yeah. It's part of who they are. And that scarlet cord that once tethered them is still part of who they are. Yeah. It's part of their story. And we cannot dismiss that. As difficult as it is to read these stories or to listen to them, we can't dismiss that because it's part of who they are. Those scars, even though they're healed, are still scars, and that's still part of their story.
You know, just on what Elise was just saying, one of the volunteers at one of my installations had formerly been a prostitute. It's not something she entered willingly, but it's just something that she got caught up in. Well, some of the people became a little upset because, you know, the scars were still there. You could maybe identify, I don't know if you knew she might necessarily be a prostitute, but you're like, oh, something's been up with this woman. And yet, when I saw her, I saw such a passionate woman who was tying on these red cord bracelets and looking people in the eye and just wanting to just impart hope. And yet, the brokenness was there, and others were recognizing it, and they were feeling a little uncomfortable. But I felt so encouraged that here's a woman who, yes, had a very difficult past, but now she was trying to be part of the solution. She was trying to be part of the hope.
I'd like to announce that hotline number. The National Human Trafficking Resource Center has a telephone number to answer the question a couple of questions ago, 888-373-7888. Write that on your brain when you see something. Yes, 888-373-7888.
Yeah, that's the National Trafficking Hotline, and that's staffed 24/7, 364 days a year, so anybody can call it.
Yep. I have a question to address primarily to Elise, I think. Is there evidence of the corruption that helps to maintain and feed sex trafficking, in particular, in Grand Rapids?
I have not seen any of that, nor do I know of any of it.
Yeah.
You mentioned pornography in connection, and it's been my awareness over the last couple of years that I think the connection between the increase in available pornography in our culture and sex crimes. There's a real tie there. Can you talk about that and about maybe what's being done on that front to, if pornography is a huge part of people's lives, and then that lust that's being fed all the time then has to have an outlet, and this is where people are going. Can you just talk about that connection?
Yeah, maybe I could start and you could finish it off. Yeah, so the pornography fuels sex trafficking. And what's interesting is because pornography is using younger and younger victims in the photographing or in the making of movies, then when the men go on these, and sometimes women as well, when they take these sexual escapade trips to Thailand, they want the same age child that was in the movie or the photograph. So they want to reenact what they saw. So the pornography has a huge influence on the sex trafficking industry. So the buyers of sex, they're demanding younger and younger victims because that's what they're seeing in the pornography.
And I would also say too that for many of us, pornography means Playboy magazine. That is not the case. Most pornography today is extremely explicit, extremely brutal, and it's not the kind of thing that you can walk into the corner 7-Eleven and purchase. And one of the things that makes it very difficult for police to get a handle on is because most of this is done on what's called the dark web or the deep web. All of us use the internet all the time. We shop on it, we are on social media, we do lots of things. But what we see as the web or the internet is only the very top layer of what is available. What's underneath that is called the dark web or the deep web, which is not accessible through a www internet access, okay? This is where pornographers work. This is where sex traffickers work. Now, not all of the deep web is bad. A lot of gamers use it. There's a lot of people that use the dark web for other purposes. But pornographers, sex traffickers use that because it's extremely difficult to track. It does not leave what they call an IP address. Whenever we get on the internet, we leave an IP address. If somebody had to track something, your bank calls you and says your card got used in Shanghai to buy a motorcycle. Is that really you? And you say, no, it's not. Well, it's because an IP address was left. But if you're using the dark web, there is no IP address that's being left. So for pornographers who are producing pornography either with children or with adults, but it's extremely explicit, the people that are in it are actually being hurt. They're using that, and it's very difficult for law enforcement, either at the local level isn't even dealing with it, the federal level and in Interpol, it's just very difficult for them to track.
Just one more quick note on the pornography, that they also are using pornography against the children themselves. So if they film the child, then they will say, if you tell anybody or if you don't do what we say, we're going to spread it around your school, or we're going to bring it to your dad's work. And so this is also used to control the children themselves, because they'd just be horrified, and so then they just start just following what the pimp says.
Thank you. Okay. Several months ago, you and I had a conversation, and you were in the middle of research, or at some point during your research, and you indicated to me that you were finding that on the federal level, the authorities were very concerned, very aggressive in trying to address this whole problem, but that you were finding at the local level, not necessarily Grand Rapids, but other localities, that the authorities are more inclined to dismiss things and say, oh, well, she was a runaway. And, I wondered if when you concluded your research, if that was still what you found, or if that was not the case?
Unfortunately, that is still the case, and I think that most local law enforcement, as Pamela indicated, will tell you that they receive almost no training on human trafficking, whether it's sex trafficking or labor trafficking. And here in West Michigan, because we have such a large agricultural community, labor trafficking is an issue. But not our current chief of police here in Grand Rapids, but the one previous, said publicly, we don't have a human trafficking problem here in Grand Rapids, we have a child prostitution problem. We have teenage prostitutes. So local law enforcement is not being taught how to recognize it, nor are they taught how to deal with the victims. You know, they're still in very many places being treated as criminals themselves. Yeah.
You mentioned taking the money out of the equation, which then made me think about organized crime or the mob or whatever you want to call it. And I was just curious what you knew about, you know, what, I mean, are these...
To some degree, organized crime is involved in human trafficking, but because it's so easy to traffic someone, I mean, for less than $100, you can buy a human being, and if you're trafficking them for sex, you can make $30,000 a year on that one person. You don't need organized crime. You don't need a whole network. You don't need a gang to do it. All you need is $100. And that and sometimes you don't even need that. You can go to the local mall and pick up a girl. Yeah. And you can invest 2 or 3 months in her, making her think that you are her boyfriend who is going to take care of her, who has bought her a new phone, who has bought her makeup, who has listened to her, who has consoled her, who has said, yeah, I know your parents are terrible. I'm going to save you from all of that. And then, you know what? I've spent a lot of money on you. You need to help me out. Yeah. So it does not take organized crime to traffic people. Organized crime is part of it, but on the whole, it's not a big network of people that are moving people back and forth from, you know, Chicago to Indianapolis to St. Paul to Detroit. It's a couple of guys.
There's stories as well where, say at a birthday party, a father then sells the girls from the birthday party. I mean, it just can be citizens that aren't, like Elise is saying, involved in this organized crime. High school girls can be trafficking middle school girls because they want to have a certain purse or a certain gene, and so that they can earn money to do this.
Are children in an area that are kidnapped for the purpose of trafficking, are they generally taken from that area as soon as possible?
Almost always. Yeah. Simply because of recognition. Yeah. But again, my daughter's case is a little unusual. Most children are not kidnapped into trafficking because they don't need to be. Pimps are smart. Traffickers are like wolves. They don't hunt the strong animals on the front of the pack. They pick off the weak ones at the back of the pack. So they go after children that are already at risk. They can see it, they can smell it, they know it. So they don't have to kidnap kids most of the time.
They also are moving these children from sporting event to sporting event, so that then they're selling them at truck stops along the way. They're following NASCAR, they're following boxing, you know, they're following football, national basketball, whatever.
And the same is true of women and young men that are trafficked. Grand Rapids is kind of on a circuit. Detroit, Chicago, St. Paul, Minneapolis, Indianapolis, we're kind of on that circuit. So young women, men, children are moved by traffickers around. And another reason that they do that, the traffickers do that, is so that the victims don't know where they are. So if they were able to get away, they have no money, they have no identification, they don't know where they are. So.
Well, this is a conversation that shouldn't end.
Absolutely.
And we need to keep this conversation going. But we have time for one more question. So, last question.
just wanted to know, as a citizen, if you were talking about children that come sell candy bars or whatever, if you see a child and they say, I am scared, I don't feel safe, if I, as a mother of my own, were to take that child inside and, you know, try and figure out a way to help it, what is my consequence as a citizen? Like, what could happen to me?
You know, I think that as a mother, of course, our first response is always, if a child comes to us and said that they're frightened or scared, we're going to try and do something. And I think the first thing that you have to do is immediately call the police. Most of the time, the traffickers are not going to come after you because they're too scared of getting caught. But the chances of that happening are extremely unlikely because the kids usually are so frightened.
Nate here would like to just offer a resource which I think could be helpful to all of us.
There's different ways that you can become further educated. Like there's some podcasts. There's like one called there's a Global Center for Women in Justice, and it's Vanguard University, and they put it on. It's called Ending Human Trafficking. It's a podcast that you can look up, and if you go on their website, they have unlimited information about it. Also, there are some things you can do about when you go to the grocery store and stuff like that. If you look for what's called like fair trade products, that's kind of the slave-free. They fair trade means that they don't, like, especially chocolates and coffees, that's a lot of slave labor in those, and if you see fair trade, that means that there was no slave labor involved in that. And California's come out with a new law called the Truth and Transparency Act, and it's a way that the different retailers and manufacturers have to show where their products and everything is coming from to let the public know that they're not involved with slave labor. So that's something that we can also try and talk to our legislators and stuff about, to try and get that in every state to where it's not just California, but they are leading the way in different things like that. And so those are just a couple different things that I thought we should be aware of.
And just briefly, Vince, if you want to raise your hand again, Vince Schumacher is currently working on a project here in Grand Rapids called Save Our Sisters, to build a safe house here in Grand Rapids. So if you're interested, please see Vince. He's got some information, and he'd be more than happy to speak with you. And again, on behalf of Pamela and myself and the Acton Institute, thank you all very much for coming.
Round of applause. Thank you very much.